The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the Better Together, How Employer Brand Professionals Can Turn Recruiters into Advocates and Champions webinar and the Trends for Recruiting in HR webinar series. I'm Nava, the Site Manager of Recruiting Brief, and I'm excited to be bringing you this session with hard-earned insight about employer branding. I'm really looking forward to talking to James today. And also, we've been recording all the webinars in this series in case you had to miss any. We'll send out the link right now. And if you have to run at any point, the webinar will be recorded. This is also a Sherman HRCI approved webinar, so all attendees who stay for the full webinar will receive an email after with the activity IDs. On that note, please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do so by submitting them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. My lovely colleague Julie will be fielding all your questions today. She'll be happy to answer any you might have, so pull up the panel and say hello to let her know that you're listening. Also, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may choose to dial in by phone. You can do so by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen and then select the Switch to Phone. So today, the reason we're all here is I'm talking to James Ellis, the Director of Employer Brand for Universum. His weekly podcast, The Talent Cast, is a weekly deep dive into understanding and fixing recruiting and employer brand problems. We're going to be sending out the link in the chat for that. But on that note, take it away, James.
Thanks, Nava. Obviously, this is not the day I wanted to be having this. This is a rough day, and so I just want to acknowledge that. That it may. I hope it doesn't feel too inappropriate to continue to have this discussion, or at least show this material. So I just want to acknowledge that this is not the day I planned on doing it. So here we are. I just want to kind of get through it and kind of, give everybody a chance to hear some of this stuff and think a little better about how to work together where it's employer brand and recruiting together. So just putting that out there that I acknowledge it and I'm aware of it. And I feel weird about it just like you do, but here we go. So let's get into it. This might be, for those of you who know my other webinars, I might be a little more toned down than usual. It's not for lack of caffeine, but let's go. So better together. That's really the topic here. Having run the Global Employer Brand at Groupon, I was fascinated to see how much work it took to get the recruiters on my side. These are, I never thought that would be a big challenge for me. And as I kind of unpacked it and thought about it and worked at it and talked to other people who do it, I realized it is a bit of a challenge for a lot of employer brand people. So let's kind of jump into it. So first off, we got a poll. So just getting that kicked off right away. The question is, how much friction exists between I think it just happened, between you and the employer brand team. And I think it just kicked me out of my presentation. Oh, goodness. All right, here we go.
The poll is currently showing up right now, James.
Okay.
When I close it, you'll be able to get back right back into it.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're asking the question, how much friction? And right now the answers are none. Everything's puppy dogs and daisies. It's wonderful. It's sweet. There is a little friction. We need to be better at working together. The third one is a good amount. It can be frustrating. And the final one, which right now doesn't seem to have too many answers, so thank goodness. It's Hatfields and McCoys. It's Capulets and Montagues. So hopefully that's not your situation, but if it is, I can give you some advice. So we're going to let this roll for another 10 seconds. Try and get 60, 70% of people to respond to this. All right, let's call it. So the response looks like this. It's grayed out. Okay. Yeah, it just got closed, Miriam. So it looks like 15% said it's wonderful, 58% said a little, and 25 said a good amount with just one or two responses saying Romeo and Juliet. So, and Miriam, you can't submit the answer. It's all closed up, but sorry, that's all right. Just a good kind of testing the waters, as it were. So let me try and jump back here.
James, real quick. Oh, yeah. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, when we turn the poll on and off, it seems to mess with my screen, but whatever, we'll jump in. So I always like to start with an employer brand definition because without it, there's too many people out there who describe employer brand to suit their own particular needs and their own agenda, and I don't want to be that person. So I just like to start with a clear definition of what employer brand is, and it really is the aggregation of lots of individuals and their perceptions of what it's like to work here, right? You take one person, you ask them, what's it like to work at Nike or Reebok or Netflix or REI or wherever, the government, whatever it is, and they tell you what it's like, what they think it's like, and you aggregate them all together, and that's an employer brand. Now, those senses and those perceptions come from all sorts of different touch points, right? It's how was the recruiting experience, but it's also what was the customer service experience like? It was also, have they been in the news lately? It's all these different touch points and information points, and sometimes absorbed subconsciously, sometimes very obviously. That shapes what people think, which means an employer brand is really a distillation of what people think of your entire company, and that's kind of important. But that's a textbook answer. And we're not textbook people, right? At least I'm not. You should know that by now, hopefully, if you listen to my podcast at all. So let's get a better answer potentially. Let's do this. Come on, there we go. An employer brand really is just how much people want to work for you, and with a big old asterisk, that they want to work for you for the right reasons. So let's take an example like Google. Everybody knows, I'm rolling my eyes a little bit. Everybody knows that Google is the number one, most desired employer by all people everywhere that have ever walked the face of the earth, right? All the surveys seem to say that. And that's great. Good for them. But do they have a sense of what it's like to work there, or do they just like Gmail? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing invalidating about that. It's just that if their consumer brand halo is so overwhelming what people's understanding of what it's like to work there, then it's a different process to manage the employer brand, right? What you want to have happen is people to understand why people are happy there, why people are satisfied there, why people like to work there. If you are someone who loves prestige and for some reason you want to work for the government, guess what? It's probably not going to be a great fit. The fact that you want to work there is great, but it's not necessarily for the right reasons. That's not usually why people get into most levels of government work, except at the very, very, very top, and we can leave that for another day. Right? So you want to make sure those things are aligned. Otherwise, you're just going to have a whole lot of applications that you're going to have to filter out, which is no fun. All right. So why specifically should you help recruiters, though? Right? That's a good question. Why are we focusing just on recruiters? Okay, good. We can see it. We can see the results. Good. Recruiters are kind of the first line of communicating out your employer brand. Now, I mentioned earlier that your employer brand comes from all those different touch points. If you're someone in the C-suite is sued for sexual harassment, that is absolutely going to impact your employer brand, but that's not a standard experience, right? That's not what most companies face. Most companies pay recruiters a good deal of money to go out and source and communicate and, encourage random strangers to apply. Maybe not so random, hopefully. But that's really where the first impression of the brand comes from. How good was the recruiter? Did the recruiter feel like they were spamming the heck out of people, or did it feel like, oh no, they really looked at my LinkedIn, they understood what I was about, they understood what I was good at, and they reached out, which is great, right? I still get random recruiting, mostly machine driven, I'm pretty sure, recruiting conversations around Lotus Notes. And I'm like, I haven't touched Lotus Notes in coming on 20 years now. So I'm not sure who you think I am and why you think I can help you. So it's clearly a good recruiter is one who really does that job, who does the research, who tries to build that relationship. The strong brand that you're going to try and build helps them the most, right? Of all the people who are going to get some value out of what you do, it's most obvious, most clear to the recruiter. Recruiters are also very social by nature. Most recruiters I know are not, some of them are introverted, but they're usually pretty gregarious, right? They're very outgoing. They're willing to put themselves out there. Repeated rejection doesn't seem to faze them too much. They are very much people, right? So the fact that they're people, they're going to be the ones who can help communicate your brand outward to other people. And finally, they're building the next kind of generation of your advocates. They're the people who are going to pick the people who are going to talk about your brand or not talk about your brand, or live your brand or not live your brand. So if they're just grabbing people willy-nilly and they're not really connecting it to the brand, or they're not really connecting it to an EVP, or they're not connecting it to the core reason why your company exists and what they get out of it, you're getting a mishmash of people that doesn't support your brand. If the recruiters understand the branding and they understand the direction and they're looking for people who fit that, it just reinforces. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy how that helps it. Okay. Clicking. Okay. But on the other side, why should recruiters care? Well, And this first one is sometimes a tough one for people to accept, but I have absolute faith that it is true, and I can kind of prove it pretty quickly. The brand beats the job every single time. And here's how I would prove it. I want you to think about that company you hate, the company that in a million years you would never, ever, ever, ever work for. Could be political, could be, you disagree with what the products they make. It could be, there's any number of reasons why you decide that that is the company you loathe. And let's say the recruiter calls up and says, I'd love to offer you your dream job at our brand. Are you taking that call? Are you responding to that email? No, of course not. It doesn't matter if they back up the money truck to your house. The brand is more important than the job itself. And in fact, recruiters feel that the most, because if they work for a brand that everybody hates, or that a lot of people hate, or they're simply unknown at all, there's less likelihood that people will respond to their outreach. And so to them, a strong brand helps them the most, right? We talked about that. Second, every good salesperson needs good marketing to support that. They go hand in hand. They support one another. They are the peanut butter and the jelly together, not one or the other. They work together. And that's, if you just have marketing and no one to close the deal, that's great. You're going to have great brand awareness, but no sales are going to happen. If you just have salespeople with no marketing, salespeople are going to run around willy-nilly trying to close any deal they can, whether it's aligned to the core competency or not, right? They need each other to help each other. And finally, employer brand provides a kind of, let's call it a 360-foot view, a perspective that's wider and broader than what you usually see from a recruiter. Recruiters are just, and that's not a ding on anybody, it's simply recruiters are expected every day to focus on the requisition right in front of them. Fill the seat, put the butt in the seat, close the job, get the hiring manager off your back, get it done, get it done. Employer brand can see a more systematic view, a more systemic view. They can see how changing something way upstream, changing the career site, changing the job postings deeply influences the kind of people who apply, which deeply influences the available pool of people the recruiters can talk to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? A recruiter might just say, I need to write a job posting, I'm gonna write a job posting. And they just write it, they put the bullets in, and they throw it out the door. An employer brand person should understand that, okay, it's not just a listing of bullets, it's about how do I tell a story of what our brand is about and who would be happy here. That's a different perspective. Not good, not bad, different. And together they help each other, right? So where does the friction come from? Right now I've kind of described a platonic ideal of everything is wonderful, right? The marketers and the salespeople should get along all the time. The employer branders and the recruiters should be best buddies, right? They should be filming buddy cop movies together. They should be kind of quipping together and turning it into a podcast of some sort. But there seems to be a lot of friction, and the polls suggest that there is a good deal of friction here. Maybe not a lot, but certainly enough that you've decided to spend an hour with me talking about it. So where does the friction come from? Well, first off, it comes from the fact that it's not about putting, employer brand is not about top of the funnel thinking. If you think employer brand is just about how do we fill the top of the funnel, it's a very limited viewpoint. It's a very limited focus. It's a very limited way of seeing the world, right? You're like I said, you're running willy-nilly to just put butts in the seats. And it is more than butts in seats. And I think, in the same way that employer branders tend to be, let's call it pigeonholed in this, your job is to fill the top of the funnel. Recruiters are also pigeonholed in this, your job is to put the butts in the seats. They're very limited understandings of what those roles can be and the real power they can have in supporting the company, right? I don't know any recruiters who just want to put the butts in seats. They want to build relationships. They want to bring great people in. They want to support the company in the broadest extent, but circumstances dictate, move it, put the butt in the seat. They're also measured on different things. So if I'm measured on speed and you're measured on attractiveness, the car we build together is going to be a little weird, right? Yeah, it's very hard to build an attractive, fast car. It's very easy to build an attractive car. It's very easy to build a fast car, but making one that's both at the same time, because we're both measured on different metrics, is very difficult. And it makes things much harder to do. And again, different philosophies. The job of the recruiter is to get the butt in the seat, is to close the rec, get it done, get the hiring manager, move them forward. The employer brand would much rather say, maybe it's okay if we wait a couple of weeks to find the right person because we haven't found that person. We haven't communicated what we're all about. We haven't made it crystal clear the kind of people who would be super successful here. And again, different perspectives, different philosophies create friction. So nothing too surprising there. Okay? But the overarching strategy actually boils down to this. If I'm talking to my employer brander folks, and I think to a lot of extent I am, they won't help you until you help them, right? It's simply, if you just, do what you do for yourself, no one's going to want to join your particular army. No one's going to want to volunteer to help you. But if you start from the very jump, finding ways to help them do their job better, you'd be amazed to see how many and how quickly recruiters jump over to your side. So the fastest, if you just want the solution of how do you solve a friction, here it is. Help them first. Simple as that. But it's not so simple. I want to talk about that a little more in depth. So there I am. That's a very bright tie, is it not? I must love the color orange. I am the director of employer brand at Universum. If you want to talk about employer brand data, I'm the guy you want to talk to. I host a podcast called the Talent Cast every week. I run a newsletter every week where I talk about the headlines in the industry and comment on that. So try and keep everybody in the space, up to speed, really, a little smarter, a little sharper in the fastest time possible. Also, in my abundant free time, I write books, apparently. And so the first book, Employer Brand Handbook, How to Work with Recruiters Better, has come out 2 weeks ago, and that's where some of this material comes from. The second book, Talent Chooses You, is a much more strategic book that comes out in 2 weeks. They're both available on Amazon. So what's the solution? Now, for me, while I'm a systemic thinker, the answer tends to be to think in projects. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but I'll just kind of get to the point first. And that is simply, if you are trying to change people's philosophy, talking philosophy is probably not the best way to do it. I mean, on top of which, most people don't like to talk philosophy. Most people don't like to talk strategy. They think they do, but what they're really talking about is picking tactics. So if they like to think in tactics, talk in very, very grassroots, direct, right there, obvious projects that they can see, they can understand, and they can grasp. They can see immediately how it helps them, right? The more you keep it in the conceptual arena, the more you keep it in the philosophical arena, the more they're going to look at you and say, geez, when is this guy going to show up in their saffron robes, right? I mean, he's already shaved his head. Why not just go all out? Why not just go ahead and put some sashes on him? And I'm sure people thought that about me. I've learned the hard way that keeping it in the conceptual is fun for some people, myself included, but not for most people. So keep it focused on the stuff that they care about, right? If you teach people who are recruiters, who are very focused on the micro, very focused on the tactical, about big ideas, they're going to say that's cool and that's interesting, but how did that help me? Remember, the big strategy is help them first. And how do you help them? By helping them in a way that they can see how the help helps. So these are the 4 projects we're going to talk about. And there should be time at the end to ask questions and kind of kick things around. But these are the 4 projects I want to talk about. But before we talk projects, let's talk ground rules. So for an employer brander, for great employer branders, and I've met many, whether you include me in them, I've met many. So I feel pretty good about saying some of these things. The first rule of great employer branding is that employer branding is everybody's job. Is no team, there is no element inside that company that can say, I don't need to worry about employer brand. From lawyers to HR to customer service to leadership to sales to product development to coding to nursing to administration, it doesn't matter. Everybody plays a role. And this is where I make fun of a certain set of companies, and I apologize, but it's a good, clear example. Everybody who's ever had to call their cable company and have to ask for customer service doesn't hang up that phone feeling like, I cannot wait to work for this innovative company. It's just not something you walk away from. Even if you got your problem solved, just the process of working in that space is not conducive to feeling like this is an innovative company. It's just how it is. Not good, not bad. It's simply a problem that needs to be solved. Every part of that company impacts the employer brand, so therefore everyone should be aware of how they impact the employer brand. Second rule, your success as an employer brander is based on how well and how strongly you build relationships. Now that's across the board, but we are very much going to focus on your relationships with recruiters. That's really what the focus of this is. But I don't know, it's not really much of a stretch to say taking this level of thinking and applying it to your lawyers. And I keep bringing up lawyers because no one really thinks that lawyers are important until the moment they need a lawyer. In which case they're thinking, why didn't I make friends with lawyers? Lawyers are magical, terrifying people all at once. And I can say that because I'm related to many of them. But when you need them and you have them in your corner and they understand what you're trying to do and they can help you, it's amazing the value they bring to table. So build relationships with your lawyers, but really build relationships with everyone. Rule 3 is that systems thinking and systems development eventually beats cool tactics and strategies. I'm not the person who's going to sell you the cool tool. I'm not here to sell you some hacks. I'm not here to talk about, quick jumps and quick shortcuts. I'm here to think bigger. But at the same time, I think bigger to support tactics and projects. And by thinking bigger, I eventually win. By thinking bigger, by not just trying to, run around in 17 different directions trying to come up with what's the cool idea, what's the cool thing everybody's talking about now, but to say, what do I need? What's most important? What does my audience care about? What's going to move them to the next stage in the funnel or whatever path you're going to talk about? That's systems thinking, building tools that make people, that get people where you want over and over again without you having to touch it. That's a system you want to develop. And it takes a little more time. It takes a little more resources, takes a little more thinking, to be perfectly blunt. But once you do it right, it's amazing how the impact, the ripples are long felt. Okay, so let's talk projects. My first project is map the process. Now, I start with this project because it supports a lot of other projects. This is kind of the building a foundation for lots of good work down the road, right? It's very easy to think and to say, I just want to jump in and do it, but this is where you invest. This is where you invest not just in the relationships, but by showing people that you understand their world really, really well. Now, maybe it was just my experience, and I don't think it's true because I think every time I tell this story, people go, yep, that sounds about right. For whatever reason, recruiters, who I love, please don't take this the wrong way. For whatever reason, I've never met an audience so devoted to the fact that if you haven't done their job, if you haven't filled a rec from start to finish, they don't have to listen to you. That you don't understand their particular world, and therefore you have no right to comment, which I think is okay, sure. I mean, I've always lived in roles where everybody else thinks they can do their job better than I am. Whether it's web design or visual design or marketing or social media, everybody always thinks that because they have Facebook, they're a better social media marketer than I was. And it was just part of the job that you had to figure out how to convince these people that you might have a better strategy or a better reason why. But beyond that, if you do this process and you map the entire recruiting and hiring process, you are telling recruiters, no. Not only do I understand what you're doing, I understand the bigger context around what you're doing. I understand the stuff that to you looks like magic or conjecture or hoodoo way up the chain, right? So for example, to a recruiter, a job rec starts the moment the rec is opened. That makes sense. They don't have to really worry about it too much until the rec is really a real thing, right? Hiring managers can want to hire people, but until they get all their ducks in a row and get comp and ben and HRBPs to say, yep, that's okay, we can pay that money for that person to do that thing, right? Their processes. The rec isn't a rec. It's a good idea at best. So to recruiters, the world starts the day the rec shows up. But the rec isn't born then. The rec comes together on a lot of different levels. Let's be fair. Without a business need, without a hiring manager saying, I need a person to do this job, none of this starts. None of this happens. So the real requisition, the real hiring process starts at the hiring manager or the business need. It goes through HRBP. It goes through Comp and Ben. Ask your recruiters, do they understand how Comp and Ben does what Comp and Ben does? I barely understand it, and I like to work with them. I met some really cool ones, if you can believe it. But when they get into it, when they really nerd out about this stuff, it's fascinating the level of thought that goes into this stuff, the data they get to play with. But recruiters don't have to deal with that, so generally they don't, which is fair. They've got other jobs to do. But by mapping the entire process from soup to nuts, you're able to see, not just understand how each silo works, but you're able to see how the gaps between the silos can be closed or what the connections are. How does a new request go from HRBP to Comp and Ben? How come it takes Comp and Ben so long to complete that process? How does the hiring manager show up? At which point do they just say, I need a person, and they walk away from the table and assume everybody's going to get their job done? Or are they very much involved in multiple steps in that process? Here's my favorite litmus test. Who writes the job posting, right? In every company I've ever talked to, the answer is completely different, right? Sometimes it's the hire manager is responsible. Sometimes the HRBP is responsible. Sometimes the recruiter is responsible. And honestly, I've seen many companies where they say, thank you, Susie, all three, exactly, where they say, I don't know, it just kind of happens. And that's just terrifying from an employer brand standpoint. Here is the most important kind of door to your brand that you can put out in the world, and everybody kind of goes, I don't know how it happens. So we just steal stuff from either a book or from other companies or other ones we've done before, all of which are horrible answers, right? It's not supporting the brand. So by mapping the entire process, you understand the process better than any one of the silos, right? You're going to leverage your systems thinking, your perspective, your 30,000, 40,000 foot view of this process to its best advantage. These people who are involved in the process know the micro better than you do, but you know the macro way more than any one of them or all of them put together. Now, what does that actually map out to look like? Well, here's the start of an example. I try to keep it super simple when I did it. And it's just, what's the step? Who is responsible for that step? And that could be who's responsible for doing it. It might be who's responsible for kind of checking the box and say that part is done. Who concludes that step? What's the timeline? And any notes you might want to associate with that. So what you learn from this very quickly is if you start to go into your own process and start to look at it, you start to realize that you had a lot of assumptions, and more importantly, your recruiters had a lot of assumptions about how the hoodoo has done before it lands on their desk, that you can say, actually, that's not true. So let's pretend, for example, the recruiter says, you know what, I got handed this rec, it's for a director of sales, and they want to hire at 12 bucks an hour. To which that recruiter goes, that's insane. You can't do that. But Comp and Ven won't talk to me about how they leveled this role or how they applied the salary, how they determine what that salary should be. So I guess I'm stuck with it. Or they decide to yell at Comp and Ben, or they decide to fight with Comp and Ben. And it turns out Comp and Ben saying, hey, it was not leveled as a director. It's just listed as a director. It's actually leveled as a entry-level manager. And that's what HRBP decided that level was. That's what HRBP's decided the role needed to be. We attached the word director because we thought it would be more attractive to people, not realizing that to the recruiter, they've made something impossible happen. You're trying to hire a director level job at entry-level wages, which of course is impossible. So by being the person who sees the bigger picture and understands how all the levers and all the buttons work and where the strings are, you can be the one to not just solve the problem, but to even streamline it. Because once you map this process, then you share the map. The next step after you map is to say, hey, everybody I talked to, hey, everybody in every one of those roles I listed, does this look right? And when they vet it and they look at it and they kick the tires and they will quibble, and that's fine, let them, that's not a problem. You come up with what would be kind of an alpha project. This is the entire map of how we hire. Now, why bother? Great question. Thanks for asking. Once you understand the silos and what happens between the silos, it's amazing what you can do, because the real ultimate value of this is that you can start to not only streamline and cover the gaps so that everybody kind of knows the process, you, having learned this process, can find places to communicate your brand in your language, in the words you think are necessary to the different players, and to ensure that every element aligns to the brand. Why does that matter? Okay, well, let's go back to the joke about cable companies, right? It's hard when you talk customer service for them to say that they're very innovative, or at least it's a lot more work for them to convince you that they're innovative, right? Think of all the companies who say they're innovative, and then you go to their ATS, which is clearly coded in 1987, and you go, yeah, not innovative, right? Think of every place that HRIS emails the candidate and says, hey, this is what's going on, or hey, this is what's happening. Let me ask this question. Who wrote your disposition email? Was it you? I hope it was you, but chances are it was not. Chances are it was a recruiter who was just kind of saying, hey, this is what it is, or I went and applied for a job, didn't get the job, stole that language because I guess it was vetted by somebody's legal, so I guess it's okay, and they dropped it in. It was there to do a function, and that function was to say, don't call us, we'll call you. Now that email, everyone knows, is painful. No one wants to get that email. No one goes, woohoo, I didn't get that job. It's a bitter pill to swallow, no question. But written correctly, you can underscore your brand and maybe even turn a loss into a win. Maybe that's where you ask people to say, look, this wasn't a great fit. We are focused on roles, we're focused on the brand pillars that are A, B, and C, which is what we care about. If you know anybody who meets those brand pillars, we would love to talk to them. Can you help us find the right people? And maybe we can help you somehow. Whatever that language is. There's a lot of different ways to write it. But chances are no one wrote it with brand in mind. They wrote it just to check the box and get it done. But now that you've identified how the entire system works, you can find dozens of ways you can communicate the brand. And here's the winner. You can do it for free because you've already paid for it, right? You don't need to buy a new HRIS system. You don't need to buy a big CRM system because your HRIS system has 4 different places in which it's communicating with candidates automatically. You just have to go in and learn what they are, learn how that process works, and then write better messages to support your brand. That's the real win. Okay, project number 2. And this is actually my favorite. I don't know why I love this one so much, but it is hands down my favorite. So taking that MAP project, see how that's foundational? We start with that. I want you to build a comprehensive checklist to define the relationship between the recruiter and the hiring manager, right? Talk to your recruiters, and the number one complaint they will have, I can almost guarantee it, is that they're treated like order takers, right? Just if you sit in the recruiter space, and by the way, you probably should now and then if you don't, listen and you will hear that language, that thinking over and over and over again. That recruiters are treated as, that they're just people who take the orders. They're not there to think, they're just there to do the thing. They're cogs in a bigger machine. That the hiring managers, that they're just there that they have all the brains and the recruiters just do that. Susie is killing me today because she's telling me they're partners, which is great, but that doesn't mean you can't help them. But thanks for chiming in, Susie. One of the ways you help break that cycle of order taking and kind of a master, servant kind of a relationship that recruiters tend to find themselves in, and they don't do it accidentally. They hate it, but they don't know how to break it. Again, they're focused very, very macro. By you focusing on they're focused very micro. By you focusing macro, you can help them have a better work experience. What does that look like? You can define that checklist so it makes the recruiter look and act more as a peer. And the more they look like peers, the more comfortable, more confident they can be if they're doing their job. And the more they work together with the hiring manager. There's not just to do this and go make it happen. Go find me a director of sales and pay them $12 an hour. Do it or whatever, right? The reason you get purple squirrels and unicorns is because the hiring manager doesn't know any better. They don't know that an MBA plumber is, something that only happens once in a blue moon. They don't know that someone with machine learning skills and nursing skills isn't a thing that happens, right? They don't know. You know who knows? Recruiters know. That's their job. But we've relegated them to just be the people who put the job postings in the ATS and go make phone screens. The fastest way to do that, to start changing that relationship, is to suggest to recruiters that they stop calling it an intake meeting. When they send out the invitation on calendaring or whatever tool you use, don't call it an intake meeting for XYZ role. You say it's a talent strategy meeting. Right there, you're setting the stage as the recruiter to say, I am an expert and I come with expertise that you should value. Just small things help the recruiter like that. And we're going to talk about how to kind of turn that into a bit of a flywheel. So when you build that checklist, this is what it might look like. Just take those steps and say, okay, what are all the steps in the hiring process that interact with the recruiter and the hiring manager? And I put a timeline on it because I think timelines help keep everyone accountable. And accountability is where this wins. Accountability is how this really takes root, takes hold, everybody sees the value of, and they can move it forward. So here's just the first part of a checklist. It may be a page or 2, but you can see it. Schedule the talent strategy meeting. That's on the recruiter. Draft this checklist, which means deciding which steps are whose and when they're going to get done by. And by the way, you print it and you take it to the meeting. You leave some holes where you can, either don't know enough or hasn't been determined yet, but do as much of this ahead of time. Because what you do as a recruiter is when you walk in with this and you have 2 copies and you hand one to the hiring manager and you keep one for yourself, you're telling the world, I'm a damn expert is what I am. I am a professional non-parallel. I know what I'm doing, so treat me with respect. And honestly, hiring managers respond. It's amazing. okay, have the meeting, get the materials you need from that. The recruiter goes back and says, okay, we're going to write the job posting. The hiring manager has to approve it. One of the things I also hear from recruiters a lot of is that hiring managers don't really engage. They have a day job. I get that. They have a whole thing that they're doing, but they expect the recruiter to do stuff, go get it done. But the recruiter can't do it unilaterally. So they need approvals, they need feedback, they need a reinforcing step. And by baking it into it and putting a little check next to it that says, hey, you have to do this. And until you approve this job posting, it doesn't go live. The hiring manager goes, got it. I know what my role is. And it's very quickly the relationship will shift. The recruiter and the hiring manager become peers. It's almost magical, which is why I love it so much, because honestly, it's stupid. It's dumb. It seems unnecessary, but it's kind of the same level of thinking. If you've read Atul Gawande's book on checklists for surgery, it's just a thing that tends to level the playing field. And by making sure none of the stupid stuff gets missed, you get to focus on higher level thinking and higher level work. It is an absolute silver bullet. And that's Atul Gawande. It's spelled A-T-U-L and then Gawande with a G. It's an excellent book. And all his stuff is amazing, but it's all surgery and medical based, if that's a thing. Anyway, so clicking things. So what are the outcomes of doing this thing, right? You're building a gift for recruiters. You're making their lives easier. What's the outcome to you? Well, first off, you get to show that you get it and you're on their side and you build a good relationship. You help them elevate themselves, right? You're not telling what to do. You're giving a little coaching that helps them be better at what they do. Again, by listing the steps, you get to define what those steps are. And those are steps you can take advantage of later. Maybe you decide, like, for example, one of the things you could do, and I apologize if you hear a siren. Like I said, it's a fire truck. Hopefully everybody's okay. By defining those steps, you can kind of see where opportunities for you to insert your messages. And one of the things I would recommend you do, and it's not going to be in this webinar, but here's just kind of the brief synopsis of it is, if you want referrals, launching a referral project January 1 and then having everybody forget about it by January 1, 12:05 later that day isn't going to work. But if you tell the recruiter, hey, you know when you post the job posting to the ATS and it's going to get pushed out to all the job boards, and you probably send an email to the hiring manager, and the recruiter goes, yeah, that's what I do. Here, let me write that for you. And by writing it, I'm going to insert a couple of things. One, here's the link to where that job lives. Two, please remember to share with your team that we're looking for someone for this role. Remind them that there's a referral bonus of X dollars or whatever your referral bonus is, right? Most referral packages are, hey, there's a lot of different options and a lot of different permutations. You should probably remember it, but you won't because it's not the time you need it. But by writing that email ahead of time and handing it to the recruiting manager, the hiring manager, when they're thinking about that job, and putting that referral request in front of the people most likely to know people like themselves, you absolutely see obvious and dramatic increases in your referral rates. It's not about tool sets. It's simply about putting the message in the right spot in the right time. And if you've mapped this process, you can write the emails. In fact, I like to write them where you say, hey, hiring manager, can you please copy and paste the following email to send to your team? You literally make it so clear. And by shortcutting the process, by writing the email for someone, it guarantees that they use your brand language and don't try and make it up on their own. But the big one, the real big one, is that by helping recruiters do their job better, they start to drive their metrics. And the most obvious one is time to fill. If there's no back and forth between the recruiter and the hiring manager about who did what and who said what and who's responsible for what, it's going to shorten your time to fill. You're going to change your own referral rates if you kind of drop that kind of language in. All of the metrics that you might have to measure your own value and your own impact are just as much metrics that other teams care about specifically recruiting. So if you help change their metrics, you help yourself. Next project, a profile. Now, I'm not talking LinkedIn profile. I think that's quite the Coles to Newcastle situation if you tell a recruiter how to build a LinkedIn profile, usually. But chances are, as the employer brand owner, you have an opportunity to own the career site or own some sort of web platform on which that you can communicate, to tell your stories, to post your videos, whatever it is you're going to do from a communication standpoint. There's a platform that you own. What I would suggest you do is build a single page for each recruiter. so that you can turn faceless facilitators into something more. You want to give them a presence. You want to give them a sense of who they are. You want to let them either write some stuff for that profile, or you can help them write it, right? You can take some photos of them, show them doing their hobby on their days off, assuming recruiters ever have a day off, and that's a good question. You want to talk about why they do what they do, how to work best with them, right? And make a single web page for each recruiter. You're going to create that page in a way that's obvious, but we'll talk later about how you communicate that. Now, just saying this is, for some people, it's an aha moment. For some people, it's like, yeah, it's a profile. Everybody has those. How does that different? Well, let me help you give you some ideas on how to build a better profile. And for me, a good profile starts with good questions. So if I'm thinking about recruiters, what do I want to know as a recruiter? If I'm looking for a job and I run into a recruiter profile, what would I want to know about them? What would help me have a better relationship with my recruiter so I can encourage them to see what I'm all about and see what my skills are so that they can be a better facilitator and advocate for me within the business? So it would be questions like, what teams do you normally hire for, right? Are you an accounting recruiter? Are you a tech recruiter? Are you an administrator? What do you do? What makes a great hire? What makes an obvious great hire? Is it the resume? Is it job experience? Is it the language you use? Let the recruiter kind of talk a little bit about what they do and how they do it. It makes them feel good, but at the same time, it helps build that relationship with the candidates. I like questions about what's one mistake people make over and over again. After the two complaints I hear from recruiters, the third one is that they see the same problems on resumes or applications over and over and over and over again. They're sick of seeing these same problems over and over again. If they have a problem they see over and over again, talk about it. Let's train potential applicants how to be better applicants, right? Just like that. What would surprise people about you? What's the best part of being a recruiter? Make them human, make them more real. And I think it's interesting if you could extract a sense of what do most candidates misunderstand about this process, especially when you're talking about recruiters who are dealing with early talent who don't quite see the bigger picture. They don't have that frame of reference. I think a lot of the recruiters are evil, like that Google bit where you type in recruiters are and space and you let the predictive text tell you what that is. I think that comes from a lot of entry-level talent who don't understand the role of a recruiter. As a facilitator, they get really annoyed when the recruiter seems to be their best friend and then the next week can't remember their name because the hiring manager went, nope. And at that point, the recruiter kind of said, I have to be done with you. I have other things to focus on. They don't quite get that. Me, I add the picture and a contact information. Then you ask the recruiter to drop it on their email signature, in their LinkedIn, to share on social media, to all their outreach messages, whether it's on LinkedIn and emails or what have you, and to say, look, it's not about here's a job. It's about get to know a recruiter who might learn about you so they can help you find a better job, right? Relatively easy. And I would, like I said, write those emails, write those links. What does that link on outreach do? And we talk more about this in the book, but I just want to say there's great ways to kind of pushing that content out there. Last project. Now, when I say getting social, here's my can of worms, rip. It's amazing how recruiters, people who are people who are usually so good on their days, on their free time, being so good on LinkedIn, so good on Facebook, so good on social media, on Instagram, telling stories, they're amazing at this stuff. And yet somehow the moment they have to do it to try and attract a candidate, they forget. It drives me up the wall. It's so crazy. It's so silly. I don't know where that comes from, but it seems to be something that happens a lot, which is unfortunate. So your job is to make it easier to help them create the audience you need or that they need before they actually need it, right? What's the joke? You don't plant the farm when you're hungry. You plant it before you're hungry because it's going to take a while for the fruit and the vegetables to sprout and become food. You want to do it. You want to build those relationships before you need them. And saying, here's a link and share this, hey, recruiters, here's a story we wrote about something, share this. It doesn't work. Now, again, this isn't about beating recruiters up because I love them. It's just something I've noticed that perhaps you've noticed too, okay? Let me see if this makes sense. Let's talk about YARPs. You might not know what a YARP is, but you actually absolutely know what a YARP is. A YARP is simply yet another recruiting post. And they're generic. They're usually pretty worthless. They're usually things that take up space for no value to anybody who ever has to read them ever. What do they look like? Well, here's some of my favorites. Join me. Well, I don't know who you are, so what exactly am I joining? We're looking for a whatever. Well, good for you. Well, how does that impact me? I'm not one of those things. Why are you waiting? Why are you wasting my time? This is a great opportunity. To which my answer is always, for whom? Again, recruiting is a matchmaking job, not a bang the drum job. It's about making matches. My favorite is we're hiring, because up until 6 weeks ago, that was everybody. So it's really not meaningful. It's very not helpful. It doesn't really drive the action you're looking for. And frankly, they're completely generic. If I wrote a post that said, join me, you would never be able to guess what company I would be talking about. You want to connect the social content, these posts, to the brand. And guess what? You're the expert. You get to help. So here's how you feed wild recruiters. Never just send the link. Package it up. Give them a strong headline, a strong description. It's a very simple way of writing it. Just, hey, here's 7 reasons why, blah, 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 blah. And if you Google Sumo, it's Google Sumo heading formulas or headline formulas. There's a set of 40 or 51 different formulas on how to write better headlines and descriptions. It's very BuzzFeedy, clickbaity, but that's bad because the stuff they're pointing to is worthless. If you're pointing to good stuff, use it, use it for good, not evil. You might even write multiple descriptions to say which one sounds like you. Just go ahead and use it. Your goal is to make it copy and paste easy, right? They see the email, they get the email, they open it up, they select it, they copy it, they go to their LinkedIn, they go to their Facebook, they go to wherever, they paste it, boom, they're done. It's how you control the message. By influence, by helping. You're making it easy for them. Suddenly, by doing this sort of thing, not only do you have, I don't know, a couple, even dozens of people who are projecting your employer brand out into the world to their audiences of people who want to absorb it, you're getting to influence them and saying, this is what good work looks like. Now, when you're talking about getting recruiters to embrace employer brand, it doesn't happen overnight. Doing these projects don't make them say, oh, I get it now. But by seeing it, by playing with it, by using it over and over again, by understanding what the outcomes look like, the power of how that works, the value of understanding how employer brand helps them becomes clear as day. It's fascinating to watch over the course of, let's say, 6 months, 12 months, as a recruiter goes from, I don't believe in this stuff to, okay, hey, I wanted to write this post. Can I run this by you to make sure I'm using the right language? It's amazing because they understand the value of it. I got one last bullet point here. You may not know what it is, but I'm going to explain it real quick. If you Google click to tweet, just like it's written right there, you can literally write a tweet and turn it into a URL and hand that URL to a recruiter, or frankly anybody, but we're talking about recruiters. And they click it and they will tweet the thing you told them to tweet. They don't even have to type anything. They just have to click the link and then say tweet. It packages up whatever text it is and drops it into their Twitter account. It's kind of cool. It's kind of spammy, so use it for good. All right. Projects aren't enough. So there are some process changes I highly recommend you consider. First of which, show up to the meetings. Every recruiting team has a weekly meeting where they complain and they vent and they let stuff out and they kind of help each other and they figure out how to work things better. Show up. Do not speak up, right? Employer brand professionals, if you're anything like me, you want to interject, you want to help, you want to answer questions, you want to be very present, which is a great kind of instinct, but it's not going to help. Be quiet. Listen. Listen to what their challenges are. Listen to the language they use when they describe it. Listen to, and as you kind of map the process and you have a better macro sense of what their world really looks like, start to connect their challenges to how that mapping process can support that. How can you solve their problem, not by saying, oh, instead of doing A, do B. You can say, oh, I didn't realize that when Rex came in, they didn't have enough certain information. Having mapped the process, I know that information comes from Comp and Ben or HRBP or wherever. Let me talk to them and see if there's a misstep somewhere. How do we rectify this so this never becomes a problem ever again? But it doesn't happen by trying to charge it and solve problems. It starts by listening. 2, recruiters are people. I know this is a radical statement, this crazy time we live in, but it's true. They are actual people. And treating them en masse, much like I've done for this webinar, is a mistake. In any recruiting team, say, of more than 10, there's always going to be one who wants to try new things, who wants to play your little game, who wants to change things and see and experiment and maybe see if there's a better way. But like all good bell curves, that means there's an inverse to that. There's always one person who you simply cannot convince. No amount of data, no amount of research, no amount of case study, no amount of anything will ever change their mind. And frankly, maybe you shouldn't. Because when you work with recruiters, and like we talked about, recruiters really only talk to other recruiters. That's who they respect. That's who they value. So if you can start with that one person who wants to experiment, get them on your side, have them build some stories, some anecdotes about how doing it your way seemed to really help, and ask that recruiter to mention it in their next weekly meeting. You start to effectively build advocates inside the recruiting team, but you do it by letting the other recruiters advocate for you, right? If they won't listen to you, but they listen to other recruiters, have other recruiters talk to them. Simple as that. Last one. It's good. You know what? It's tough because we love what we do as employer branders usually, and we assume everybody's in our head 24/7. They understand all the little projects we've got going on. They understand all the little tactics, all the little strategies moving around. And let's be fair, there's a lot of them in our heads most days. We just assume everybody knows what we're talking about and understands what to do. If we say things like, hey, here's some social content, can you share it? We assume everybody gets it and knows what to do. I would recommend not. I would recommend not dumbing it down, but keeping it simple and keeping it direct. I like a newsletter system where you simply say every week, here's the 3 news stories I would like you to push out. I've written the headlines, I've written the tweets, I've written the whatever. Just when you get a chance this week, can you share these or share one of them? You don't have to share all of them, but let them feel like they have a sense of control, because they do. And you're not dictating terms. You're simply saying, I'm supporting you by providing this in the easiest possible package I can think of. And then remind them how doing this thing helps them, not you, them. So if you say, I'd like you to share this content on Twitter or on LinkedIn, say, and I think if you use this hashtag, it will attract more people of, so for example, it's a story about a machine learning person or an AI person or a nurse person who did something cool. And it's a story, say, hey, when you share this, note that I'm using a hashtag for nurses or machine learning or whatever. Hopefully that will get you some attention from other nurses or machine learnings or whatever. Let them know why you're doing it and how it helps them. That's how you get buy-in. So yeah, I wrote a whole book. Here it is. It's available now. I am just trying to get people to get it so they enjoy it. So it's $5 whole if you buy it electronically. It's $11 whole if you buy a physical copy. It's on Amazon. So there it is. End of pitch. So just fair warning, at the end of all this, I think later today, I think I'm going to send you links to the slides, a link to my employer brand newsletter. So if you want to connect to that and get my regular information about employer brand stuff, it's there. And finally, if you don't link to me already, I don't know why, I'm a delight, as you can tell. We should be friends. So let's just connect. So with that, who's got questions? I hope you have them. I can't wait to hear them. Okay, I'm going to start with Audrey. Let's see. Mention how to create a strong headline, but Google. Okay, the question was, how do you Google sumo something, right? I was not clear. Let me open up the little thing. I will put it in the chat. If you Google, it is sumo headline formula or formulas. It will get you where you want to go. Sumo is the company that wrote it, which is why it's an easy way to, but literally it's, here's the formula. Here's an example of what that formula looks like in the wild and how to use it. And honestly, you won't like some of them. They'll be like, oh, that feels too smarmy, or that doesn't fit the content, or whatever it is. Fine. There's literally 50 others to pick from. So feel free to dive into that. Thank you, Audrey. Good question. Who's got more questions? By the way, and Audrey, I put the answer in the chat window, so hopefully you can see it. All right, more questions. Susie, don't get quiet on me now. Last call for questions. I know we've got about 7 minutes.
We have, sorry to butt in, I just
no.
say thank you so much for your presentation so far. And we do have a question from Edgar. And
okay.
So he says that very often at operation level recruitment, the recruiter and whoever is responsible for the hire is actually the same person.
Yeah.
And it would feel, even though it's the same person, it should be easy to improve. But it feels like they separate the job and then you're still filling the spots only as a recruiter,
Yeah.
but complain about not getting the right people. So
Yeah,
how would you
it's
handle this
amazing
situation?
how people put themselves in their own pigeonhole, right? If you're surrounded by recruiters or all the recruiters you know are people who complain about order taking, on some level you begin to assume that the job of a recruiter is to order take. And you go, but that's stupid, that's dumb. Why would I do that? Why wouldn't the hiring manager want a better recruiter? Why wouldn't they want better relationships with their talent experts? But because the assumption is that they're order takers, they kind of let themselves be order takers. So even when you're in a role where you can do both sides of it, right? It's still, it's so easy to play color in between the lines and follow the leader. This is the way it's supposed to be. Doing good employer, this is why employer branders, I hope, there are many of them on this call. You understand that my broader sense of why employer branding works or who makes a great employer brander starts with being willing to try things that on the face of it are probably completely insane or just completely whacked out. That you're willing to try new things because you're in a position where you are responsible for the output of every element of the company that we talked about. Customer service can impact your employer brand. Leadership scandals can impact your employer brand. The news, the product, the service, the recruiters, all those things impact your employer brand, but you have authority over none of them. So only crazy people take that job. The same way I get the sense that there's a certain kind of person who takes that particular kind of recruiting job to say it's very rules based because they're on the operations side, and operations tend to focus on rule driven behavior because it makes their lives easier. It makes sense. But then that tends to trickle into recruiting, and recruiting is about relationships. And I know a lot of good, smart, wonderful people. I can't think of anybody who would be excellent at both those jobs in equal measure. It's like kind of saying, that you're an amazing chess player and I don't know, no, let's not do machine learning, but just something radically different. Where you're like, those are two different brains. How do you fit them into one head? It doesn't really happen very often. So it's tough. And honestly, if someone has both that roles, it means they have twice as much work to do. Simple as that. So it can be tough to make change when you're feeling like you're running around like a crazy person just trying to get stuff done. Any other questions? We got a few more minutes. End it with a bang. Put your questions in the question tab. Anybody?
All right, well, thank you so much for that response, that thorough response. And yeah, if anyone does have any more questions, feel free to drop them into the panel. And if we're unable to get to them during the webinar today, I'll make sure to pass them along, but we do have the time now.
Hurry.
I think Susie just sent out a question now, James.
Do you share data with recruiters? Heck, yes, I do. That is a great question. And the answer is absolutely. The question is, what data do you share? Now, I'm a proponent of having good dashboards and having good reports that you share, but I don't believe in having one report that you share with everybody. The report that you share with leadership, with your boss, with your recruiters, they're all different reports because they're all trying to answer different questions. Like for a recruiter, you want to show how having better, let's say you've made a project where you wrote better job descriptions or better job postings rather. You want to be able to show that the quality of candidate has gotten better or the number of candidates has gotten better, or you want to find ways of saying the people who apply, a higher percentage of them make it to the first phone screen, that they're deemed quality candidates. Whatever that is, your leadership may not care about that as much, but your recruiters absolutely will care about that. So figure out how to build and share data that the audience you're sharing it with cares about. The more you can make it actionable, the better off. So if you're going to talk about social media, you're going to talk about, hey, I've made it super easy for you to share a piece of content. I wrote it for you and I made it like clickable and copy and pastable. Let me show you what's going on. By sharing it, we got 400 engagements. We got all this stuff. And to me, an engagement is a bit of a vanity metric, but it's clear to the recruiter that by doing X, there is a result. And over time, you might come back and say, okay, there's our weekly dashboard. Here's our quarterly dashboard. But because of the work we do is very macro level, one secret is to provide an annual report. Hey, over the last year, here's the 20 things we did. And I'm not going to report on each little one of them because together they're self-reinforcing. They drive things. Some of them are very conceptual, some are very abstract, but here's what we're seeing. By writing better job postings, by sharing better social, by being seen as a peer with your hire manager, we're seeing lower time to fills. We're seeing lower cost per hire. We're seeing better quality candidates. We're seeing fewer opportunities for the hiring manager to kick the rec back and say, hey, I didn't like your 4 finalists, go get me new ones, right? The big metric, the one that you can really hang your hat on is this: offer acceptance rate. I mean, I could do a whole webinar on the pain and pleasure that is the offer acceptance rates, but the nuts and bolts of it is there is no more painful rejection than the one you and the hiring manager and the interview pool and everybody and who's involved in this process spent in getting someone all the way through from being aware of the company, to consider the application, to applying for the job, to showing up to the phone screen, to showing up to the first round interview, to showing up to the final big interview, to talking to all those people and wasting all that time and energy, and then to finally go, meh, no, I'm good. Oh God, that's like a dagger in the heart, right? That's brutal. It's expensive. It's painful. So if you can show how you're lowering or increasing your offer acceptance rate, and that's a kind of a big ship to turn, share that, because everybody will see that and say, I see how all these tiny little changes I'm making lead to a big outcome. That said, it doesn't change over every week. It doesn't change every month. It's a slow shift, like referral rates, right? These are big, big boats you want to turn, but you show them roughly every year or so. Those are great kind of metrics you want to share out. All right. I think that's all I got. So thank you everybody for being here. I hope this was useful. Like I said, we'll share the slides out. I'll share an email just to let you know who I am and where to find me. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and to hang out and listen to this stuff. I hope it was super useful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.